Hello and welcome to Jedi Journal. My name is Setanaoko, and on the line with me, I have Jedi Knight Justitia. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. I got the day off today. Get to relax, get some housework done,
I don't like
and
housework.
then play and play some Sims, which is more likely what's going to end up happening. So,
Hey, at least you're able to admit that. And then also
yes,
come on here with me, which this is kind of like a last minute.
yes,
I
it
told
was. Yes.
I told Justitia that we were totally gonna have to do this show because we've been talking about doing a show like this for a while now. And
Hmm.
here we are. We're just going to jump in. So today's episode is going to be on the gunshot. It's actually a lesson that I have been teaching since 2010. I developed an entire curriculum for aiding emergency services way back then, while I was military police in Okinawa for the U.S. Army. Um, and this is like the first thing that I exposed people to. It was a scenario, which I'll read off to you what the scenario is, and then I wanted people to respond. And the reason it was developed was because way back then, we had a lot of people that wanted to be very gung ho. Like, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to be vigilante. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be the hero, not a vigilante. I'm going to be the hero and I'm going to preserve everything. And I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I'm like, you're not trained. So let's talk about some realistic things for you to go through. And I start out this whole thing with like a scenario that you have to start applying different ideas of what the Jedi path was. Now, this was written pre Jedi Compass. So, but some of the things that can be applied from the Jedi Compass can easily be applied in here. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's just jump into what the scenario is. So, it starts out, it is dark outside. So I want you to picture this scene in your head. If you have to close your eyes to picture it, go ahead. It is dark outside. You are in your house and you hear some arguing next door. Now, you don't really do anything, but after hearing this arguing, you suddenly hear what sounds like a gunshot. You see someone running away from the home because you just happen to be looking outside, and then the home falls silent. There's nothing in that home anymore. Do you go in to make sure everything's okay? Do you so like just some things that you also know, you know that the individual that ran out of the house is completely gone. You most likely will not see them come back. So I'm just going to tell you that in the scenario. Uh, do you dare to walk into the home to ensure the safety of others in there? Why or why not? So, Justicia, what do you say in this?
So, just a kind of side note, when Allie was talking to me about this earlier on the phone, I went to, the same exact things that she kind of mentions in this lesson. Um, so a little bit of backstory about me before I actually explain this a little bit more is that I was born and raised in Pontiac, Michigan. Pontiac, Michigan, I want to say is kind of like a very, very small version of Detroit. It's pretty high in crime, very high in poverty. Um, and I want to say most of my teenage to adult years, my street was full of drug houses. Like we had college, people living next door, renting the house next door, and they were having parties, which had a lot of violence. Um, you know, I we and it's kind of funny because I didn't mention this to Allie, but gunshots are very normal. And in her lesson, she talks a little bit about that on why, some people won't respond to gunshots. And I can actually say from personal experience, like me and my boyfriend will sit here and he's like, oh, that was a gunshot. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's it. We mention it. That's it. We don't act on it. We don't respond to it. It's more of an acknowledgement. Let's move on. Um, and a lot of the reason behind that, like with me, if I know that the gunshot is happening across the street, first thing that I'm going to do is call 911. But here, like in this condo, I don't know where the gunshots are, so I'm not going to call 911. What am I going to do? Call 911 and say, hey, I heard a gunshot. And they're going to be like, where? I'm going to be like, great question. I Have no idea. It sounded like that it was very far away, but close enough to where I could hear it. I mean, that really doesn't give them a lot of information. Um, but if I was in this situation, I'm sitting inside my house and there's arguing going on next door. I hear what sounds like a gunshot go off. It goes silent. Somebody is outside running. First thing that I'm going to do is call 911. I don't fathom how anyone would think that it's a good idea to, oh, well, let's go check it out and let's check on the neighbor. Number one, you don't know who just shot off that gun. You don't know who's inside the house. You don't know if somebody's hurt. You don't know the situation that you're going to be walking into. I don't care how fully trained you are. I don't care if you know martial arts. I don't even care if, honestly, you're an off-duty cop. You really don't know the situation and you're walking in and they're blindsided. Now, I am not law enforcement. I'm just saying common sense. Even if I had that training, I don't know who's in there. I don't know how many people were in there. There could be somebody sitting there that didn't even argue, and they're the ones that shot the gun, and they're just kind of sitting there. Walking in there, not knowing the situation, not knowing the dynamics. Let's say that you don't know your neighbor. Let's just say that your neighbor has some kind of mental illness or some type of situation that is going on. You don't know what you're walking into. Even if you know your neighbor, you know that they're 80 years old, you know that they struggle with walking. My next question is who is 80 years old and is going to allow somebody inside their house that's a possible danger, right? I mean, these are the kind of things that you should be thinking about. You should never walk into a situation not knowing what the situation is. Somebody leaves the house, you know that they're not there. Okay, that's fine. You don't know who else is inside that house. You don't know if that person was kind of shot and maybe they're expecting that person to come back. Maybe they have a gun and they're waiting for that person to come back. And then you come walking into the door, it's night, they can't see you. They're shooting you because they don't know who you are.
Yeah.
You could open up and announce yourself and stuff like that, but let me just say, in those kind of situations, you're not connecting A and B to equal C. It just doesn't work like that, especially when you're in high survival mode like that. And then the last reason why you don't want to do that, outside of putting yourself in danger, is that you don't want to contaminate evidence. You go walking inside that house, you could be stepping on someone else's footprint or boot print, shoe print, whatever it is. You could be contaminating. You walk in there, you see a bloody scene, you don't know how your stomach's going to respond, you throw up. I mean, there's just so many different situations that can happen. For a normal person, we are not fully trained, and you don't know how you are going to respond in certain situations like that. It's not until you're in that kind of situation are you going to realize how you are going to respond to that situation. Are you going to fight? Are you going to flight? Or are you going to freeze? So you don't know how you are going to respond in that situation. And even with training, you can still walk into a situation and not know how to respond to it. We have first responders for a reason. The fire department and ambulances walk up to a potential violent situation. They don't go in there, at least not around here.
No, they're
the
not
police officers,
they
right?
have to have the police officers come in. So like you were talking about, you're an off-duty officer, you may be trained, but do you have your second life vest on? Are you calling for backup? Because even though you could go in by yourself, you should not. You should always try to get backup. So like my husband and I are both trained. We could theoretically clear a house, no problem, and we would probably stand a chance. We ain't dumb enough to do that. Like, unless I know the family incredibly well, we're not dumb enough to do that. And even then, I'm not going to know a family well enough for that. Like, I need to know, I'm going to want to know, do you have anybody visiting? Is this random? Like, I don't know. As you pointed out, it could be your 80-year-old family or friend next door, but you don't know if their cousin's in town. You don't know
Mhm.
if their grandchild's in town. You don't know who's got that gun. And as you pointed out, so I will say, you also said that when a gunshot goes off, you don't know where it is, what good's it going to do to call the police. There actually is a good reason for that. They can triangulate your apartment from the other apartments that are calling in and get a better idea
Oh,
of
okay.
where that location is. So every time I hear a gunshot go off, I make a phone call and I have Nathan sit there because he's better at dialing about how far it would be. And we tell them we feel like it was about this far from where we are, probably in the complex next door, or it sounded like it was in our complex. And then they can take the phone calls and figure out roughly where they need to go and start searching. These are things that they are trained to be able to do, and it gets a lot easier now that we live in a day and age where you can actually sit there and you can find out where, like, you can pull up a map and look at it. Oh, these people in this area called up. They said it kind of sounded far. It's kind of closer in here. So now we have a search area that we can look in. So I understand why people are like, oh, it's not going to matter. Now, if it's really far from you, probably don't worry about it. Like if you can tell it's really far, but if it's kind of closer in and you hear it loud enough that you think there might be, it's a little bit closer and definitely no one else would probably, or you believe that you need to call it in. Always call it in, no matter what, because we don't know if uh, uh, someone got shot. We don't know if someone accidentally shot off their weapon while they were cleaning it. We don't know any of these things, but we need the police in the area. And then there's also so I was actually going to research it, but I didn't have time because I would like to know what the new research says regarding altruism. Have you ever heard of Kitty Genevieve's? So I think it was like a 50s case. I could be wrong on the date or on the years, but it was like before my time, before I was born, before you and I were born. And this woman was getting raped and killed outside in New York. If you guys look up Kitty Genevieve, you can find her. Okay. So, and look up Kitty and altruism and you'll find the study. But the study talks about diffusion of responsibility. No one called the police while she was being raped and killed and screaming for her life. They found out, everybody knew that it was going on, but no one thought that they should call the police because for whatever reason, like they didn't think it was their responsibility. Somebody else is already going to do it. We don't know who's calling. I do find it interesting, like when I call in because there's gunshots. Usually, if I'm calling, then they actually know about it, and it's not like it's. I would say it's infrequent, but it does happen. I think since I've lived here, it's happened about 3 times, and I've only lived here 3 years, and those 3 times were in a period of 2 years. So it's uncommon, but it's common enough that no one should feel the need to make the phone call. But every time we hear it, we know that there are other people calling in.
Well, and that's kind of the issue around here, is that it happens a lot. And when I say a lot, I'm talking 2-3 times um per day. And that's not an exaggeration. If you go to look up Pontiac murders, because I'm like right on the border of Pontiac, right where I'm currently living, you won't see anything, but you hear it all the time. So it's kind of one of those things that if I was to pick up the phone and make a phone call every single time that I heard it, there's absolutely no way would the police like me at that point.
Well, and they already do pretty much hate you, don't they?
Well, and I was just about to say, I call them enough.
Mhm.
And it's gotten to the point where I'm actually on one of the officers' phones because that person is calling me all the time. So, I mean, yeah, I want to be respectful and not abuse that system.
Right.
And I guess that's kind of a lot of where I sit, is that, you know, I you never want to take a risk to
Yeah.
not do it. But at the same time, if I don't have like solid, hey, I know where this came from, I really don't want to be
Well, the people that
doing
are
stuff like
serving
that.
the phone call.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even
That
imagine
case,
how often
you're
I'd be calling.
absolutely right. And
Yeah,
that does generate one of the problems that we have with the
yep,
idea of diffusion of responsibility. Um, but it has its own complications, as you point out. It's not a clean cut, easy thing. In this case with Kitty Genevieve's, that was kind of wasn't a normal thing. That's what actually sparked the idea of going and doing research on diffusion of responsibility. And New York wasn't the same as what it is today, or wherever it was. I don't remember where it was, but if I remember correctly, it's kind of a place where I think, oh yeah, there's probably a lot of gang shootings. I just don't remember where. But that's kind of the point there, is that, you know, we have diffusion of responsibility, and we have to really take into account to make the phone calls when they're important enough to make the phone calls. Which, if you've got the house next door, or in your case the condo complex, and you hear it and you look outside and you see someone running, yeah, that's a pretty good indication you should probably make a phone call.
oh
So
yeah, like if I had that kind of information, if I'm sitting in my condo and there's, you know, a gun goes off and I know exactly where it came from or the area in which it came from, yeah, the first thing that I'm doing is calling the police. I'm not going outside. And here's kind of the whole thing that interests me, and I don't mean that in a good way, in the community itself. Because we have this, what do they call it? The white knight complex, where we see a situation and we want to go in and save. And in reality, you could, but you don't know what kind of damage you're doing in the meantime. You know, and I'm not going to switch stories, but if anybody has ever heard of my bar incident in a situation with my ex-boyfriend who is physically abusive, I got the crap beat out of me because somebody tried a white knight. You know, unless you can secure safety and make sure that person is staying safe, popping in there for 10 minutes to de-escalate the situation probably is going to make the situation a heck of a lot worse,
yeah.
because you can't. And you know, in part 2 we'll talk a little bit about my personal situation, but you can't secure someone else's safety. You as individual citizen do not have the power to do that. Now if you say, hey, would you like to go with me and leave, the person can say yes, but they might be jumping in, you know, out of the frying pan and into the fire. They don't know who you are. You know,
So
it's
they'll stick with the devil they know.
yeah, I mean,
They're
at least
really in
that
a
one they
place
can
right now where
handle.
they can do that. Yeah, you have to have
Right.
a rapport with a person to be able to pull that off. So going back to the gun set, and actually in a future episode, I want to touch base on that situation specifically. I want to do that on the white knight syndrome, because your situation is just freaking like that. That's
Yeah.
couldn't have a better scenario to
Yeah.
pull from to point out how damaging this can be. So this the gunshot is actually about duty to all. It's your
Hmm.
responsibility to everyone. And you know, you've made a few points here where you talk about, like, one, you don't know what situation you're going into, and you could be contaminating a crime scene. And then that in that contamination, it comes back, you're the person who was actually the one that took out whoever was in there, if it's, you know, bloody scene and whatnot. Or you know, you destroy evidence by accident. It's not on purpose you do this. I mean, don't get me wrong, the police are going to destroy evidence when they come in too, clearing the place. for safety, but at least they have the second life vest. They have the backup
Right.
there to go in and clear the building properly. So yeah, it does get contaminated, but you want as little contamination as possible. And at the very least, they know these police officers have likely never been in this home. You're a neighbor. We don't know if you've been in this home before. And like, so it's
Right.
like the whole thing, it goes down to being overcoming recklessness, one, and being objective in how you look at the situation. You can be a really good witness and keep eye on that house. And even at that, though, like you only have so many points of entry you can look at. One person's running out the front door. You don't know who was running in the back door. You can't see the
Yep.
entire house unless it's a little itty bitty thing. You know, most people
Yep.
don't have a little itty bitty shed for a house. So
Yeah.
there's all kinds of things that go into the scenario that you don't know, and it's reckless to go in, even if you have like you and Jeff together. Like Jeff has military training. If you both went in there, like at least you're taking backup, but you're still contaminating the scene. You're still running in thinking that you're gonna do good, and that in and of itself is dangerous, thinking that you could be doing good, but in reality you don't know what you're doing. Then when the police come in, so let's say that somebody else called and the police come in, what's going to happen if they think it's you? Like there's all kinds of things that go into play, and the best thing you can do is be a witness. So for like me and Nathan, we hear a gunshot go off. We tell our son to go run to the bathroom, get in the tub, because like we don't know really how thick these walls are. These are thin walls. But that's probably the most fortified location. And then we turn off every light and we peer out the window so that nobody knows that we're there. But we also are at higher ground. People don't normally look up.
Yep.
And we know how to like camouflage. But you know, we're looking. We've got our head on a swivel so that we can say, hey, this happened. This is what we've seen. And that's the best thing that we can do. But we're not putting ourselves in danger. That gunshot's close enough. We're probably running to the bathroom too. Depends on, you know, what we really paradigm shift between those things, because we've just been exposed. And that does, while that comes down to some training, we're also putting ourselves in significant risk because we don't know. So do I recommend people do that? No, not really. I'm dumb. I will freely admit that me and my husband are a little bit dumb, but we like and everyone's like, but you're not really you're mitigating the risk. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand. We're dumb. Like we should not be really doing that. But if we are going to do this, we're going to play it as safe as possible, because we recognize the invaluability of having witnesses say somebody ran this way, somebody ran that way, and being able to point to the police or tell them on the phone, this is what's going on. Hey, you're calling it in from me in the other room. Like we're whispering back and forth, and no one knows that we're there. And then when the police are on scene, all right, they can see everything. We're going back to our house. No one's going to know we were part of this. Nothing.
Well, you know, and one of the things that popped into my head, if there was a gunshot that went off, and if I contacted 911 and told them, hey, this is my location, I just heard a gunshot go off, person was seen running, you know, out in the street, I'm giving them the facts, not my opinions. If I was to ask dispatch, do you want me to go look in the house? I find it very hard to believe that dispatch is going to say, yes, ma'am, please go in there. I can't speak
you out of it.
Yeah. And I've seen enough, like I said, I'm not dispatch, I'm not the police, I'm not law enforcement, but I've seen enough live stream type of situations with police, and they're like, well, should I go, blah, blah, blah. And the cops are like, no, do not put yourself in that kind of situation. I need you to back down. Just tell me what's going on. I will communicate that with the police.
Oh,
Nobody wants you in that
no,
situation,
they
because if
don't.
you go running in there and there is somebody in there still with a gun, now we're talking about a hostage situation. Now they got to protect
Or you're
themselves and
dead.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
I mean,
mhm.
we really need to keep an eye on this whole, oh yeah, well, I'm going to go run because I have all this training, blah blah blah. I don't care how much training you have.
Yep.
You should not be putting yourself in that kind of situation. Let's just say that you do go in there, you do get shot. Now there's no witness. Now you're not helping anybody with
Yep,
anything.
exactly. And that is
Yeah.
the big drive there, is that if you don't have a witness that was on the outside who can be objective, because like now we have a couple of problems here. It's dark in the scenario, right?
Mhm.
Somebody that's maybe darker than me. I'm pretty pasty, but like someone with a good, nice tan, you can mistake them as being a black person when they're actually white.
Oh, yeah.
And like and even in that, like being sober enough to be able to say, okay, they looked like they were dark skinned, they looked like they were light skinned, they looked like they were this or they were that, then at the very least, you're not your adrenaline is not not really what's in play. People are thinking, okay, the person looked like they were dark skinned. They could be a tan white person.
Mhm.
Because you couldn't get
Yep.
definitive features. You just see someone running. Like if I had shorter hair, you can't tell if my hair is like in the dead middle of the dark. You can't tell if my hair is is the hair of someone who is uh black or Hispanic or whatnot. Like you can't tell that stuff if I had shorter hair. If I had longer hair, you might be able to tell a little bit more, but you wouldn't be able to necessarily distinguish me from this or that because it's dark. Like
Yeah.
that's the big thing. It's dark. And but you can say, I see a car out there. Like you can sit there and you can think about it. What is not right about this scene? Not just did I see someone running away, there's a car there that's not supposed to be there.
Yep.
There's, this or there's that. And then like even if and this is a good thing about knowing your neighbors. I know the neighbor downstairs over to the left. So I don't know if it goes A, B, C, D, but I think it's A. So in A, I know that that is an older gentleman. He doesn't talk a lot, but he carries that weapon everywhere with him. He has a gun. I know my neighbor well enough to know that he has a gun. And I am thinking straight, and I can say, I know and this is why you should know your neighbors. I know my neighbor has a pistol. It is not a revolver. It's just it's got a clip, probably 5 to 10 rounds in there. I don't know how many rounds his clip holds, but I know he's got one that has that. It's semi-automatic. I don't know which model it is, but I know it's semi-automatic. And he has that. I also know that his house, or at least when he moved in, he had a lot of antique furniture that he didn't want to get rid of. And I remember that the guy who was moving in his stuff said that he wasn't sure how the guy was going to walk around. These are all things that if you know this information about your neighbors, and yeah, I get it. We all want to be homebodies and whatnot. And we all just don't really want to know who our neighbors are. But if you do know, it makes it a lot easier for you to not just be a witness, but to give detailed information that the cops need to know. Am I walking into a situation where someone has known weapons? Am I walking into a situation that it's going to be incredibly hard for me to maneuver around the house? Like, it would be nice to know that so that when I'm bringing in my full man team, watch out, don't trip on anything. You need to be really, really careful. This is not a clean home. I mean, it's probably
Right.
for most of the time that it's not a clean home because not everybody lives in the movies. I mean, like, look, You've seen my house before. It looks like it's lived in. I don't have the freaking house that like everybody loves Raymond has. That's beautified and like
It's not a real thing.
not,
Yeah.
okay, it's not. And we cops, we know that. Well, cops know that. I'm not a cop anymore, so I can't say we, but we know that people are messy. But it'd be nice to know how cramped it's going to be to get in there, what angles I might have to like. Just it'd be nice to know all that information and have that quickly available. Because then it tells us, you know, we cannot be complacent. And that is something that we never really think about when we talk to people. We think, oh, they're always good to go. They always know what they're doing. Complacency comes from thinking that all the time. But the more information you are given, the more opportunity it gives you to think, I can't be complacent. I have to remember that this is what's going on. So you give as much information, relevant information, like don't tell your whole life story to the dispatcher, but you give as much relevant information. And this is actually helping the community at large just by not going in. And
Yeah.
and then it goes into the ambulance. So I had a friend when I was actually doing this, one of the Jedi Masters over at Force Academy at the time, he was actually in he did ambulance runs. He was a paramedic with, well, not paramedic, he was a volunteer ambulance person. Because he was still in, like he had just gotten out of high school. So it wasn't like he had a degree or anything, but he was a part of the volunteer ambulance team. And he pointed out that for every single person on scene that is a casualty, you need one bus. So you got somebody, now we know we hypothetically know, in which case that's another point. You heard what sounds like a gunshot. You don't know if it was a gunshot. I mean, you might, because you've heard it enough times, but not everybody knows what a gunshot sounds like. A lot of people will mistake the backfire of a car as a gunshot. And sometimes even people who are trained, just loud noises, they will put it in their have PTSD.
PTS. Yeah.
So those things, like, we don't know if they were gunshots. That's why I put in the scenario, you heard what sounds like a gunshot. And part of that is to get you thinking, oh, it might not be a gunshot, but you still need to call it in because you don't know. So the problem that you have is that there's somebody possibly in that house that needs an ambulance. And now you're walking in and if they're unconscious and then they suddenly become conscious when you walk in, they don't know who you are. And then they could take you out. They still have that adrenaline running. And even if they know you, it's dark. Even if you have the lights on, they are like, in their head, they could hallucinate that you're the same person that just took them out. Like, you don't know what's going on. They don't know what's going on. All of these things factor in. And now you're another casualty that another ambulance needs to come out for. Now, let's talk about your area, just to kind of give an idea. How many people on average should, or how many ambulances do you think you have in your area?
Oh gosh, if I was to sit outside, you will hear some kind of siren, I want to say every 5 to 10 minutes.
So
But
huge.
yeah, like earlier, me and you were on the phone. I walked over there and the cops are over there. I didn't hear a siren then, but I also live next to I-75, which is a huge highway. So ambulance constantly goes over there. I mean, I live in a major city, so I'm constantly hearing some kind of sirens, whether it's ambulance, fire department, or the police. And I'm also right there on the border of Pontiac, West Bloomfield, Troy, Rochester, and I live in Auburn Hills, all within a block of each other. So I'm not even sure what city is going into play.
There.
So
right. So now
a lot of them.
That means that there's a need, there's a huge need for ambulances in your area.
Right? Yeah.
Now let's say that we have to take 2 of those out of play because you went out what could possibly be going on now at this point? That other ambulance could have been responding to someone who's having a heart attack.
Yeah. Or a car accident,
Or a
which is
car
very common around. Yep.
all kinds of
Oops.
things that we're sitting here and we're looking at and we're like, oh, we need ambulances for this and that. And here you are, you didn't have to become that casualty, right? You didn't have to take that resource from someone else that might really need it because you put yourself in a situation that you didn't have to be in when all you had to do was call the cops. So these are all factors like what our actions in and of themselves can have repercussions that affect an entire community of people. And those are things that we have to be aware of. That's kind of one of the lessons of the force, is that our actions reverberate and they don't just impact us. So we have to be intentional about those things. We have to be objective. We have to not be reckless when we do things. And those two are concepts within the Jedi compass, in case anyone didn't catch that I was using them. And that's like overcome recklessness and objectivity. So all of these things, and even overcoming your emotions, because we all feel this need, we want to do something to help. But the only thing you can do to help is be a good witness. And you might not be the best witness. You might not be able to give someone the details of what someone's face looks like or anything like that, but you can give time, date stamps, just call in and say, hey, I heard a gunshot at this time. And then the police, who have access to all the resources to figure out the rest of it, can figure it out from there.
Correct.
Does it
Yep.
always get resolved? No, but you've given them the best possible chance to by doing this, by just being a good witness. So was there
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I kind of wanted to be a side note to being helpful in those kind of situations, if I may.
Yep.
So we talked about the first responder. First thing that you do is call 911. So for those who don't know me, know that, or probably don't know, I'm actually a social worker and I am a case manager. So usually if a first responder, which sometimes I might call, sometimes someone else might call, I don't know the actual term, but I can end up being a second responder, meaning that, the police could call me up and say, hey, this is the situation that we have. This is what the plan is. We need you to do X, Y, and Z. Now, then we have, like family situation, friend situation, kind of like witness thing. But me as a professional in this kind of situation, being a social worker, I'm known what they call a mandated reporter. So kind of going back to this gunshot situation, very rarely do, and I could totally be wrong, I'm just saying based off of my observation, very rarely does gun situations happen sporadically. Rare, right? Maybe stranger on stranger type of situation. I need to rob someone because I need to get money, or they got my drugs, or something like that. Very rarely. Generally, those kind of situations come with a lot of red flags beforehand.
Yeah.
And like I've been watching a lot of crime documentaries, and you also hear about it when like some kind of mass shooting happens. There was a lot of red flags. Like they're like, oh no, that person was so sweet. I would have never thought that this was going to happen.
You know what?
It's
I was
like,
talking to my husband about that recently. He's like, no, they're just trying to,
no,
like, they just were
yeah,
completely blind to what the red
yeah,
flags were. But if you look at it, you can see
yeah.
the red flags. They're just
And
not
and
willing to
that's
see it.
that's kind of the thing, is that social media, well, this person was posting this and that and whatever, and this person has, I kind of mentioned mental illness earlier, just to kind of clear that up. people that suffer from mental illnesses are more likely to be victims of violence rather than perpetrate violence. So let me just throw that out there. But, mental illness, right? You have a situation where a person is probably not on their medication, and they start verbalizing that they're hearing voices, or, that the devil's trying to tell them to do something. I just watched an episode that happened like over in Europe in 1985, around my birthday in August. There was a situation where the guy's like, hey, I'm hearing my dad tell me to kill my mom. And what did he do? He got up and killed his mom. But those voices were happening so often that everybody already noticed that he was starting to argue with mom. Him and mom are not getting along. There are some kind of red flags. Do you want to call 911 whenever you have a suspicion? Probably not. I mean, I kind of feel like a lot of us would be calling 911 and the police and this and that or whatever. But if you have a legitimate concern, and like I said, I am a mandated reporter. If somebody tells me that they are going to hurt themselves or someone else, I am mandated to report that. The first thing that I'm doing is, if it's work related, I'm on the phone with my supervisor, then I'm contacting law enforcement. If I'm not in work, first thing that I'm doing is calling law enforcement, right? I have to. It's so drilled inside me, whether I'm working or not. Nobody is coming back on me for failure to report. It's not going to happen. But if I had a legitimate concern and I'm kind of just sitting there watching, and let's just say that it's a mom and dad situation, right? Or mom and child situation. And I'm like, I'm seeing a lot of emotional abuse. I'm possibly seeing some physical abuse. I'm watching how the kid is responding to the mom. I'm trained to kind of see that. I don't work at CPS, which is Child Protective Services, but I kind of know some things where I'm like, that's suspicious. I'm not going to call 911. I will call CPS. I will call APS. And for those that don't know, it's Adult Protective Services. I've called them quite a few times with suspicion. And the key part is that as a mandated reporter, I am only allowed to report. So I call APS in my situation because I very rarely do I deal with CPS. And when I do, it's usually on a personal level, but I will call APS and I'm like, this is the situation. This is what I think's happening. I don't know. Just based off of X, Y, and Z, I'm just a little bit concerned. I have no proof that anything's going on, but I saw this and I'm kind of a little bit suspicious on what's going on.
Now
And
it's
I
your turn
give them
to
that
investigate
information.
and
Yeah,
figure it
it's
out.
that,
And I've done
and
my due
that,
diligence.
yes, and that's kind of the key that I was going to, is that it is not my job to investigate. Like when somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, so and so just did X, Y, and Z. I call up one of my homes. I call and I'm like, hey, so and so I just got off of the phone with so and so. They're reporting to me X, Y, and Z. What can you tell me? I'm getting all the information. Then I'm going to contact APS or recipient rights,
That's
depending
another
on the
really good
situation.
point. You do have to rely on other people's expertise. So like I know
Yes.
that you and I have talked about how if you found a situation, where someone was consistently violent and acting out, like ruining their house, and they've had to go in and redo the walling or whatever because it's like that kind of violence, right? You have always said, well, what I see usually when I see something like that is that something triggered them. And it's important for me now, like I can't teach that person or those people how to deal with that situation or how to not hit those triggers. I have to teach them to report what those might be as triggers so they can see a pattern, and a behavioralist can come
Correct.
in. And so now so you're taking that information and you're saying, okay, so the best person to deal with this situation is the behavioralist. Let me call up,
Yes.
I don't know, Lindsay. I'm just making up a name. Let me call up Lindsay. She's the behavioralist that's on our staff, and she's going to get in here. I'm going to like put it on there. And I know you've had problems with behavioralists in the past where they don't come in even though you're pressing on them, and then you go to the next level up, and you're like, "Hey, supervisor, I need you to step in and get this behavioralist here because it needs to happen today." Otherwise,
Correct.
like, or it should have been last week because this person's getting more violent. There are things going on, and it's not necessarily that the what do you call them? The people that like the assistants that are there, the
Caregivers.
yes, the caregivers. It's not
Mm.
necessarily that the caregivers are trying to make this happen. They're not trying to instigate it. They just don't know how to deal with this problem. So like if we go back to this gunshot situation, let's say that the person that lived next door had IDD and you heard what sounded like a gunshot, but really what it was is, remember I pointed out that some people if they have PTSD, they don't know that that's really what's going on. They just hear a loud sound.
Correct.
That could
Yes.
easily be
Yes.
a violent person took something and after like a year and a half slammed it against the wall.
Yeah.
And that person that has PTSD thought it was a gunshot, but really it was just some chair going against the wall and they're acting out. And then that's another thing. You walk into that situation, you don't know what you're doing because just like I said, as you as the social worker, you aren't supposed to be teaching that. You have to rely on somebody
Mhm.
else because you can't keep all of that knowledge in your head.
No, God, no,
Like
not
there are
no.
specialists for these things to help with that. And we
Yeah.
have to trust those specialists, but we also have to be in a system and know the right systems to call. And then,
Yes.
and that's one of the things that that 911 helps connect people with. Now, sure, we know that a lot of people, they're upset at the police because the police aren't trained for that kind of stuff. But again, I point out you can't hold every little bit of information in your head on how to deal with the situation. And the behavioralist, so like you've dealt with behavioralists before, is every single person going to have like the same management?
Oh God, no, 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 no. And that's kind of the whole thing, is that everybody responds to situations differently. I have a caseload of over 40 people. Every single one of them is different in their own unique way. I want to say maybe 40% of my people that I work with have some kind of form of autism and is on the spectrum. But every single one of them is different. And it's when it comes to autism, I gotta say it is the most interesting situation ever, because I have seen some stuff on there and I'm just like, wow, there's a reason why autism in itself has its own specialties. For kids, they have APA therapy, which is a kind of like play therapy for people that have autism. Um, it is very unique. And Joe over here is not the same as Smith over here. Even though that on paper they look exactly the same, they're not. Everybody has their own situations. Everyone has their own experiences. Everyone has their own, situations. Earlier I talked a little bit about the fight, flight, and freeze,
Yeah.
right? For me, I'm more of I don't want to say fight or flight. I might, maybe I'm a little bit on the fight response. Twyla, she'll freeze. My daughter. Jeff, not sure what he would do. Jeff's my boyfriend. Not sure what he would do, but all of us are going to respond to the same situation differently because our personalities are different. The way that we see threats are different. My daughter, you raise your voice to her, she sees that. It causes her anxiety. Where with me, you yell at me and it just kind of goes over my head because I'm used to it.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're dealing with some kind of situation, especially in, the scenario where, let's just say that this person's 80 years old, let's just say that it's your neighbor, right? You said that he has a gun. I'm going to go ahead and assume one of three things. Number one, he's a huge patriot and believes in the Second Amendment. Two, he's a veteran and has some kind of situation going on. Or B, his experience says that he needs it, right? Because generally people are not just going to go out and get a gun unless they have a reason for it, whether it's some kind of behavior. So if it's an 80-year-old who has a gun, maybe that person that just ran off was the one being shot at, right? You don't know.
You don't know.
And that person could have some kind of form of PTSD. I know from my own experience with PTSD, when I am triggered, I'm not in now. I'm actually backdating, right? I am reliving an experience. PTSD, I'm driving down the street, being around in a certain area triggers my PTSD. And even though I'm still driving and I'm still talking, my brain is reliving a memory that happened a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And if I am in a military type of situation, I'm not military, but let's just say that, I am, and I was over in Iraq and I saw some crap go down, and I am currently living in that moment, 80 years old. I have a gun in my hand. I just shot at someone. Some stranger comes in. I may not see them like who they are actually. I might see
And I'm
them.
really glad that you brought it up that way, because I was kind of hinting, or I talked a little bit about that, but even just something way in your past can put that in your situation.
Yes.
PTSD, like we see it on TV, that's what they relive and that's how they relive it. But we all think, well, maybe
It's
this
not always
exaggerated so that you can understand what they're going through.
no.
No, that is what is going on in their head.
Yeah, they're not sitting in that living room. They're out in the desert and there is somebody with a gun walking in on them.
Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing. That is what they are perceiving. And not saying that all PTSD is like this, not in any way, shape, or form. Some people don't have that experience. Sometimes it's just a fleeting thought. Sometimes it's not even a thought. It's a response.
Yeah, your body reacts certain ways. Like I know one of my triggers is like, well, it's not really a trigger, but, and I don't know, because no one's really pointed it out to me, but I know for a long time that when I would approach a guy, a male, any male, I would step back, I would rock back. And then I would just move forward, because I was abused as a child by my father. And so my body responded that way, and I'd have to press forward to do it. But that is a body reaction that is from PTSD, and you still have to press through it. Even if you don't know up here that that's what you're doing, you still do it because your body keeps that score, so to speak. And yes, no, you're absolutely right that it's not the same for everybody with different PTSD actions and whatnot. Some people see it, some people are living it, and then some people don't. Some people so we can't, as you said, we can't really say that it's all the same for everybody. And you're right, it can't, but that's things that we don't know. Like there was a gathering where somebody had a response. We're not going to name names, but someone had a response to someone firing off a firework at a neighboring location. No one knew that that person had that bad of a PTSD trigger. I was at another gathering and there was a guy, he got drunk and he didn't know he had PTSD, but I was able to gauge it while I was walking with him. And he pushed me down because he was upset over something. And somebody else was very upset that he had done that. And I said, no, don't go back and talk to him about it. And they thought that I was saying that because I was afraid, or that I was just like a people pleaser. I'm like, no, he has PTSD and he needs to work through that. And it only comes out when he's drunk. These are things that people don't know necessarily because they don't know to go get the help or whatnot. And as someone that is a bystander who just heard a gunshot after a loud argument, we don't know. And these are all
Mhm.
kinds of things that we think we know about these people, but we don't know. We haven't spent time with them to find out all the little ticks and triggers and whatnot. They might not like being around people when they're drunk.
Mhm.
So you would never see them when they're drunk, but it doesn't mean they don't get drunk. And
Right.
as I'm sure that you've known people who they seem like they're perfectly fine with when they're drunk sometimes, if you don't know. Like,
Sure.
okay, I've known some people that they're very high functioning alcoholics, and unless you're trained to recognize it, you're not gonna know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's what I mean. So, like, if they're out on the porch one day and they're a high functioning alcoholic, and you didn't know that that's because you don't know them well enough to recognize those signs, it's not something that's just going to trigger in your head that, oh, they're an alcoholic. You don't know these things.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Not
so
until you get to know them and just
yes,
happen to,
exactly.
you
I'm
know,
not
be
saying that
there when the crap hit the
you
fan.
completely
Yeah.
blind to it. It's just that you have to know them a little bit better than passing acquaintance to see some
Yeah.
of them sometimes. But those are all things that factor in. I think
Mhm.
we've kind of tapped out this discussion. And I think like the biggest thing to take from our discussion is that you can't be the everything for everyone. And as a result of like this concept to have a duty to all that we have in the Jedi compass, it also means being reliant. Like you have a duty to the behavioralist to put in the hands of the behavioralist to deal with a problem. You can't be the client's everybody. Justitia can't
Correct.
be client's
Yes.
everybody. I can't be my neighbor's ever like response to everything because I can't do everything. And these are things that we have to relinquish our ego from so that we are able to better function in a more healthy community around us. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Jedi Journal as we work towards awakening the Jedi within.